Victoria is a stunning place to live, and I'm sure many of the 6.6 million people who live here feel the same way. Those 6.6 million people, each and every single one of them, deserves a say in how Victoria is shaped. As it stands, the way their communities and neighbourhoods are shaped, moulded and designed is directed by a single piece of legislation called the Planning and Environment Act 1987. Today, I have to ask everybody in this chamber an honest question. Why is it even called the Planning and Environment Act? It would be more fitting to call it the Planning and Development Act with a nod towards the environment, in my opinion. The reason I'm standing here today is because I believe the environmental component of the Planning and Environment Act has been mostly disregarded and ignored for far too long. I'm contacted daily by residents and community groups who are concerned about the destruction of the environment by relentless concrete pouring and tree removing planning approvals. Planning approvals that are failing the environment, destroying tree canopy and contributing to global warming. We're seeing the destruction of native grasslands, reduction of green wedges, decreasing wildlife corridors and an escalating urban heat island effect. One thing that remains consistent whenever you mention the Planning and Environment Act, constituents groan, they sigh. Our predominant piece of legislation to shape Victoria shouldn't bring out this kind of reaction from residents it's intended to serve, and particularly about the environment the Act is meant to protect. That's when you know you have fundamental flaws that need to be addressed, and the government has promised to address them, or at least hold an inquiry into them. But the recommendations, when they come, will not be enacted for years after that. Look at the slow take-up of the much-lauded, even by the government, of the very worthwhile recommendations of our inquiry into waste and recycling. Now, this will be too little too late, so can we wait to take action on our suffering ecosystems? The planning system is failing to protect trees. In our city, our tree canopies are struggling for space with ever smaller lots and apartment blocks. Vegetation cover is falling in Melbourne, and particularly on private property. More and more concrete is being poured to accommodate Victoria's rapidly growing population. Environmental offsets do not work. They amount to a net loss of what we seek to conserve. Council tree canopy targets are useless unless we implement strong policy to assist councils seeking to preserve vegetation and protect native animals on both private and public land. Urbanisation across the world is continuing at a rapid pace. Much of this growth in population is taking place in urban centres, where the expansion of population has created major environmental challenges. But it's not just an urban problem, it's the fringe of Melbourne and rural Victoria that needs protection too. We talk about climate change, sustainable development, environmental mainstreaming and greening the economy. But are these visions being supported by policies that are environmentally healthier and creating a more sustainable Melbourne? It's not realistic to think that we can continue with the current mass construction planning policies unmodified and still protect the environment. I don't think that anyone can deny that our current environmental laws fail urban habitat. In fact, 25% of Australia's nationally listed threatened plants and 46% of threatened animals can be found in our urban areas. We see the need to create environmental laws that protect and restore this habitat and make our cities more livable. There's no point making change to our legislation in 10 years' time when our environment is all but destroyed. We're on the precipice of an important period in history, a period of history that will determine the survival of our natural world. In the coming years, the protection of our environment is going to be the single most important issue that not only this Parliament faces, but also every other parliament across the developed and developing world. And the protection of our environment doesn't just relate to climate change. It concerns our local flora and fauna, threatened species, protected grasslands, and even the health and well-being of our people, our residents. A legislation pertaining to the environment shouldn't allow toxic waste to be dumped in dense communities near schools and homes. Legislation pertaining to the environment must do better than that. There are endless research articles that show how healthy environments improve both our social and physical well-being. And when we move beyond the scope of residential development and look towards large-scale projects such as quarries, gas import jetties and the like, the potential for environmental devastation is enormous. This legislation deals with large projects as well as urban residential development, ensuring that every project will have to address the urgent need for a better environmental outcome. That's the purpose of my bill today, to amend the Planning and Environment Act of 1987 to give this Act some environmental legitimacy, to make the environment an actual priority as it should be, not just a buzzword printed on some legislation. The first part of this bill will reinforce the importance of the environment in the objectives of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. The current Planning and Environment Act has become a bizarre and contradictory toothless tiger for developers to exploit legal gaps and thrust through their projects with little safeguards for the community and hardly any ability for those affected to voice their concerns. It's become a document laser-focused on building and development that only trips up projects with the most undeniable and egregious of environmental impacts. My bill today would amend the purpose of the Planning and Environment Act to establish a framework for planning the use, development, protection of land and the protection of the environment and native species in Victoria in the present and long-term interests of all Victorians. That is, adding those vital words, the protection of the environment and native species, to the overarching purpose of the planning scheme. As everybody in this place will be aware, the Environment and Planning Committee has been undertaking an extensive inquiry into the decline of Victoria's ecosystems.
Sorry, Mr. Hayes, I have to interrupt business according to standing order. Question without notice. And I call Dr. Cummings.